This episode is sponsored by the IoT job site, the world's only dedicated space for applying for and advertising IoT vacancies across the world. Register now for job alerts or get in touch via let's talk at theiotjobsite.com.
Welcome to the IoT podcast show. Nick Earle joins us today from Eseye. If you don't know Eseye is a fast-growing IoT enablement business based here in the UK in Surrey. They have over 2,000 global customers. Nick, welcome to the IoT podcast show.
Great, Tom. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And of course, Nick, no stranger to podcast yourself, obviously hosting a very popular IoT Leaders podcast.
Yes, that's right. But it's nice to be on the other side of the desk, and I'll look forward to see how you do.
Yeah, no pressure. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to all our listeners. In fact, this is the first time I think I've recorded a podcast this year in 2022, and I haven't done it for a little while. So there is a little bit of apprehension. Do I still know what I'm on about? Can I still hold a conversation? Only time will tell. Ladies and gentlemen, so if you don't know, Nick Earle, aside of running the IoT Leaders podcast, is the CEO of Eseye. Nick, can you just give a short introduction to yourself and your background in IoT, please?
Yeah, well, short intro, more years than I care to remember in the IT industry, but let's just say it's several decades. I've worked in 5 countries, done most bits of the IT industry, sort of hardware, software, cloud. I guess snapshot this is my 4th privately held company, and I've done 2 big jobs at worldwide SVP level for 2 $50 billion companies, one at HP, which is over in Silicon Valley, and one at Cisco, which was my last big one, where I ran the worldwide services business, and which is about a quarter of the company from a quota perspective, and the cloud and managed services program globally. I've also dabbled in some non-IT stuff. I was global operations, head of global operations for Hyperloop, so we can talk about transportation projects, but I don't think we'll do on this one. And so I've been here as CEO of Eseye for 3.5 years.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, fantastic background, Cisco, HP, Hyperloop. We'll definitely have to chat about that in another conversation. Unfortunately, we probably won't be able to now.
Well, I'm the guy who tried and failed to kill HS2. So
right, okay. Well, in that case, I don't want to polarize our audience, so we'll definitely leave that one for now, I think, Nick. Yeah. Excellent. Well, look, let's just jump straight into it. I mean, obviously, we had a pre-call, as we do with a lot of our guests on the show, just to talk about things that we wanted to talk about. And one of the things that you had mentioned in that call was obviously 2022 being quite a disruptor to IoT. Lots of changes, lots of things going on. You know, your insights in this are really invaluable. So to kick off, could you talk about what you think is going to happen in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, of course, everyone thinks a lot of things are going to happen, and you have to say, well, didn't you say the same things last year? We always think this is the year it's going to happen, right? Oh, believe me, this is the time. You know, maybe going back to actually in my Cisco days, I think it was 2010 or 2011 that a whole bunch of companies, including Cisco, said there'd be 50 billion things connected by 2020, and none of us, I think, ever thought we'd be doing a podcast at the beginning of 2022 and say, okay, what actually happened? But the answer was 11 billion. And the bulk of those were smartphones and tablets. So if you actually say pure IoT devices, it's about 3 billion. It's hardly a fantastic achievement. So clearly there was some major issues. And frankly, you can sum it up as one word, it's complexity. Everyone says it's so damn complex. So the question is, so why is it going to change in 2022? And because it's still pretty complex, but there are 2 or 3 things which are happening sort of pseudo independently, which actually, I think if you take a step back, say, actually, this is actually going to change the structure of the industry. And let me give you an example. One of the things is the eSIM. So the eSIM, which is, I'm not talking about the physical form factor, because eSIM will become an iSIM, it'll get inside the module. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that it's dynamically programmable OTA. So what we're doing is we're breaking the 40-year lock that there's been between the MNO, the mobile network operator, and the SIM. Because the SIM did many things, but one of the things it definitely did was it would take a proprietary IMSI, the International Mobile Subscriber Identity, into the device and lock it in. So once you chose your SIM, you chose your MNO. The MNO chose the roaming partners, and they control the switch. eSIM basically breaks that proprietary lock. So 820, 830 MNOs, all now moving to eSIMs. The SIM manufacturers are all making their SIMs as eSIMs now. 2022 is the year where it really takes off. And you think about it, you've had 820 stovepipe proprietary solutions available if you want to do global connectivity. And now you can have a single SIM, and the user or the MVNO, mobile virtual network operator, can choose the underlying connectivity partner. That is arguably the most fundamental change to cellular connectivity in the IoT context that there's been. And it would have very, very significant consequences. One of them in particular is actually very positive. Like all disruption, there's winners, there's losers, and there's new entrants. The winners are primarily the large enterprises. If you look at the data of the 11 billion versus the 50, it's classic Pareto, Geoffrey Moore crossing the chasm, pick your business school theory. But it was the 20% of the companies, the biggest companies, that own 80% of the things that haven't done the global rollouts. There's been a lot of experimentation, but we haven't had true global rollouts. The reason the big companies have not yet crossed the chasm is because they couldn't put a single SIM in a device and have it connect anywhere in the world. Anywhere. They want a global SIM, but there isn't a global MNO. And so one of the big winners of the eSIM model will be large enterprises who can say, I can now put a SIM, say, chip on the board of a device at manufacture, and when I deploy it, it will choose the MNO. So winner, enterprise. So that will cause an inflection of adoption. Then you have new entrants who see things as an opportunity. So there will be recent announcements since you did your last podcast. AWS now offering AWS private IoT. You can, as an enterprise, you can buy a 5G license, a private IoT license. You don't have to be an MNO, regulated as an MNO. And now what you get is AWS saying, well, you'll be able to buy connectivity from AWS. Well, that will be an eSIM, and you buy your connectivity off a marketplace. And so if you think about that, then the MNOs not only are going to lose the proprietary lock, but they are also going to actually, if they go with the hyperscalers, they're going to be competing with everybody else based on pretty much one parameter called price, which is not what you want. And so two major answers to your question. One is, I think eSIM is the most fundamental change for a long, long time. And secondly, it's going to be great for enterprises. You're going to see more global, truly global solutions, which is great because we want the business outcomes from IoT. But actually what you will see is MNOs in particular under pressure to move up the value stack and become truly global and compete based on global capabilities, which will mean interoperability between MNOs, partnerships, as opposed to just roaming agreements, which is really just a commercial model to fill in the gaps where they don't have their own coverage.
Yeah. It's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that, Nick. I think what I've spoken about with people in the past is this need for a common platform, a common understanding across lots of different areas. And that's added to the complexity of the rollout. So the fact that we're here with, as you say, 3 billion actual devices, things that perhaps, aren't necessarily just mobiles and tablets as well, is this issue, right, of SIMs being locked to countries and various other bits and pieces. So I think absolutely this is going to be a fantastic growth area in 2022. Staying on the lines of eSIM acceleration, you've gone on record in a report of mentioning around a single MPLS network, the rise of this, and obviously you've just touched on it now. Can we talk about potential 5G and the disruption that 5G is going to have as well?
Yeah, there's a lot there just to unpack it. First of all, just to explain the report, we've done an Iot Predictions Report, which is on the Eseye, Eseye website, which covers this in a bit more detail. But First of all, let me start off in the order which I think, if I can recall, you asked the question. What do enterprises want? They want one platform. And by one platform, it's really one CMP, connectivity management platform, which manages public networks and private, so it not separate platforms. Today, the MNOs not only have their own proprietary SIMs, but they have to choose a connectivity management platform. So there's the Cisco Jasper camp, there's the Ericsson DCP camp, there's the Verizon ThingSpace camp, there's the Vodafone GDSP camp, there's the Nokia Wing camp, yada, yada, yada. So if you're a large enterprise, not only have you got all these silos, but you've actually got to add together all these platforms to create a single platform. And then what you want is a single platform for all your SIMs, not a different set of platform for a different subset of SIMs, because otherwise you're going to get different APIs, different contracts, different pricing. So the whole thing is ripe for simplification, interoperability, and disruption. I mean, it is incredibly fragmented. It's no surprise. You could argue it's a bigger surprise that we got to 3 billion, not that we didn't get to 50 billion. It's just the cost of gluing it all together is put on the shoulders of the user, and is the reason why it's complex, because it's a fragmented proprietary IT ecosystem. So all technology starts off as proprietary, and then ultimately user demand causes the requirement of an international standard to emerge and interoperability. And so with EUICC, what we're now getting is the ability to transfer the connection. And then what you get is an abstracted agnostic platform that's cloud-based, which sits above the MNOs, that does all the things that I said, handles anyone's SIM, single set of APIs, single remote SIM provisioning, single pricing, and actually federates connectivity across the MNOs. So packages up and presents connectivity as a service to the end user. So why is an MPLS network important? Well, the moment you start saying the target market is enterprise, then you have to actually look at what do enterprises want. They don't sit around the exec team table and say, well, what we really need is an MPLS network. What they say is, we're really worried about security for our devices. So as the number of devices connects, because we're solving the interoperability problem, the number of devices grows exponentially. As the number of devices that are connected grows exponentially, the threat surface grows exponentially. So when we did our survey, another report on our website says, what's the number one inhibitor that is holding you back from adopting? It actually wasn't this complexity. That was number two. The security concerns were number one. We think of Colonial Pipeline, and that's just scratching the surface of what's happening, because IoT devices are not sophisticated. You can't put agent software on them. You can't control the processor. You can't control the firmware. So there isn't a model for securing these devices that really works. And the other problem is that as the devices hop between the MNOs because of EUICC switching, their IP address is changing. So now you think about it, you're not Tom the podcaster, you're now CIO of Megacorp, and you want to roll out 100,000 SIMs worldwide. And those SIMs, you're going to put eSIMs in, EUICC enable eSIMs, because that's future. And you think your SIMs are connected to Vodafone, and then tomorrow morning, 400 of them are connected to Telefonica, or they're connected to Verizon, or 20 just moved to AT&T. Every time they move, the IP address changes. So there's two consequences of that. First of all, if your application contains the IP addresses, which about 25, 30% of applications do, they say, I know where the device is, reach out to this IP address. The device isn't there. So never mind securing it, you can't find it. And the second consequence of that is that if you were, say, using Vodafone for all your SIMs in a pre-eSIM world, now you're using 40 or 50 MNOs because it's all being federated and packaged for you. How are you going to implement security policy centrally with auto deployment to the edge? You can, in one uber mega MNO model, well, my security is implemented over a private link to Vodafone. And Vodafone, I use Vodafone security. But if your SIMs are connected to 25 or 30 MNOs, you're going to have to do that 25 or 30 times once you found the device. Because when a SIM switches on EUICC from Vodafone to Telefonica, Vodafone doesn't know that it's gone. They just know that it's not doesn't know where it's gone. They just know it's not connected to them. It's like you pass the rugby ball, but you close your eyes, you don't know who's caught it. You just know you don't have the ball anymore. So you're an enterprise and you think, well, how on earth can I, isn't this just made security worse? Now, if the MVNO, the person with the abstracted agnostic switch in the cloud, single set of APIs, etc., which is what Eseye is, but if that MVNO has a single MPLS network through which all packets traverse, regardless of which MNO they are connected to, so they've implemented their architecture on a ring network with all the MNOs connected to the ring, as opposed to a point-to-point architecture, which most MVNOs use. If they have a ring MPLS network connecting their data centers, then it doesn't matter which MNOs the devices switch between. For them, they've got their packets, and they know where the devices are because they're keeping track of the switch because they're doing the RSP, the remote SIM provisioning. So suddenly you start thinking about asset visibility, security, compliance, a whole bunch of policies, configuration policy, industry vertical compliance, a whole series of corporate must-haves, which are nothing to do with data from IoT devices. They're the corporate IT policy. They are going to have to be deployed to the edge, even more importantly than deploying it to the printers in the office. So, and by the way, all the devices in the office gradually will go from a Wi-Fi connection to a private 5G connection. And your factory with all your robots and your pallets is going to be 5G. So basically, even today, what we think is on the corporate network, in the future, will go to a private 5G network. So suddenly you're faced with maybe 80, 90% of all your devices are on networks that you don't control. The only way of implementing policy to the edge is through a single eye-of-the-needle approach, which has to be a private MPLS network, which is run by the MVNO. And if the MVNO has a private MVNS network, then they can say, you tell me your security policy, and I will apply it using my partnerships or my own software to all devices, regardless of the fact that they're switching. Because they may be switching at the end, but from my point of view, they're just packets on the network. And so we formed a deep partnership with a company called Armis, which is a agentless security company. The world leaders, Gartner ranked top Magic Quadrant in agentless, which does exactly that, which is to be able to do agentless security for IoT devices in an eSIM world. It's just one example, but what the point I'm trying to make is if you let go of the technology and helicopter out and saying, what does this really mean? The IoT market is going to fragment into low-cost providers. Like once, great. If you want low-cost, simple functionality, cheap data, there's a bunch of cheap data people, and you'll find them listed on AWS Marketplace. Will compete based on cost per megabyte, but it's a volume market. If you want enterprise value and be able to pass that tick list, which the CIO, the CISO, the CFO, the CEO of these companies want in large enterprises, you have to have enterprise capabilities. And those enterprise capabilities need to be deployed to the edge where the edge is dynamic and switching between MNOs, public and private. And that's why MPLS extension of policy to the edge is fundamentally important. And so we believe that the market will bifurcate into volume and value. And value is a high bar for people to move up to because it does require these sorts of capabilities that I've described. So I do believe you'll start to see that shake out in 2022, and it will apply to everybody. No one's immune from it, but certain industries, certain industry verticals will be one of the first to adopt it. As always, certain industries go first, sort of the Geoffrey Moore bowling pins, if you know you're crossing the chasm. Certain industry go first, but we'll cross the chasm or start to cross in 2022 and get into mainstream adoption in 2023.
Yeah, I mean it's a big shift, isn't it? In general,
Huge shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Long overdue shift.
Yeah, I would say so.
Right.
The slightly ironic or or just bad timing element to that is whilst you were talking about eSIMs, the eSIM in my Apple Watch decided to ring and I had to turn it off midway through, so it didn't spoil the podcast.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that, and I didn't know you were going to say that. But if you actually look at, does this world already exist? There is just to get technical for a bit, there's a technology in consumer devices. You don't have this. Your Apple Watch does not. You don't have to think which MNO am I going to be connected to. It uses something called SMDP Plus, which basically allows it to pull the IMSI from the different operators. So you can take your Kindle or your watch or whatever it is all the way around the world. You turn it on, and you don't think about it. Especially if it's a cellular connected device. Let's take your Kindle. You don't think about it. It connects. You can download a book on any beach in the world. But that is consumer technology for consumer devices. When you look at business technology for business IoT devices, you have to manage the MNOs. So the what we're looking at is the model that was created for things like cars, because clearly Tesla, you don't have to think about it. Cars and Kindles and those big devices, which was only connected for a very few people, now entering mainstream and becoming available for all devices. So the FYI, it does exist. It has been proven. It's just not entered the world of industrial IoT yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, often it's the case of many initiatives and tech initiatives, right? The consumer side, it sometimes, yeah.
There's volume, there's money, there's volume, and the users aren't sophisticated, so you have to do it.
Yeah, Nick, you've touched briefly on Eseye there, company you're obviously a CEO of, and a little bit about the work that you're doing. I'd like to give you a bit more of the opportunity to talk about the business because, real phenomenal success as a company. The relationship that you've got with it's Armis, isn't it? The relationship.
Well, Armis is the security. We're Armis's partner for security amongst multiple relationships.
Yeah. What can we expect to see from Eseye advancements in the business going forward as well, specifically?
Yeah, a lot of things, but maybe one of the best ways is to. You know what? I'm going to talk about your Apple Watch again.
Okay, I'm glad I brought it up.
I'm glad you didn't turn it off and put it on silent. Look, the question is, which industries are going to adopt first? And because whichever industries go first that cross the chasm, the bowling pins, the industries that knock down the front bowling pins and the rest of them go down. That's where we'll go. So you want to know where we're going? We'll go. We follow the money, as everybody does. So let's talk about one. And when you were talking about your watch, I think it's a good example. I'm going to talk about healthcare, right? So let's take healthcare apps. I've got Fitbit on. You've got Apple Watch. You've obviously got more money than me. You paid more for it.
I've got the Aura ring as well. Actually, I left it at home this morning.
I've got a 4-year-old Fitbit with a cracked screen. But
right, okay.
But the point is that if you look at all these health apps and it's based on your Apple Watch, which you've synced via Bluetooth to your iPhone. Well, you take healthcare and what's going on in COVID now, in the UK, protect the NHS. You want to free up the beds. And so you want to get people out of the beds who haven't got COVID to free up the beds to put people in who have got COVID. And at the same time, you can't get an appointment with your doctor anymore. You're lucky if you can get a phone call. And so this whole area is called RPM, Remote Patient Management. And basically what we're seeing is an IoT-enabled disruption, which is fundamentally, like work from home, fundamentally changing a model, which is where you don't go to get the treatment comes to you. Treatment comes to you. So you don't go to the doctor comes to you. You may go to a hospital, but you check out pretty quickly and you go home with the medical instruments. Now, the point about that is that the people who need this care are, let's say, 85-year-old person. They are not going to sync an Apple Watch to an iPhone at 85 in order to send the data back to the hospital. Because in fact, your app on your Apple Watch doesn't go to your hospital. It goes to a startup company who says, I'm going to offer you services that tell you what's wrong with you. So the whole model is built differently. It's with disruptors at the other end. So what we're seeing happening is that what you really want to do is take the devices that are, for instance, in a hospital room, like a pulse oximeter, which is really important for COVID, um, uh, the oxygen level of your blood, a heart monitor, glucose machine that measures your glucose, etc., etc., etc. Take the devices that are normally on these trolleys that go around the hospital, and they get wheeled from room 1 to room 27, and nobody knows where the hell it is. So actually let people check out of a hospital and go home with a box of devices that ubiquitously connect to anybody. They just get connectivity becomes a feature, and they just turn it on, and their doctor can see a portal of how they're doing, and they can monitor them. And there's some AI software which runs in the cloud that says that Tom's numbers are okay, but this one is trending in the wrong way. So you have an intervention. The doctor reaches out to you. The same thing with your doctor at home. It's based on I'm sick. I make the choice that I'm sick. Therefore, I phone up for an appointment and I don't get one. But we should be able to be monitored by our GP, not just by a startup health app. So, so what we're seeing is that with the advent of ubiquitous connectivity and eSIM capabilities, you actually can get small devices that just cellular connect anywhere in the world. Now, there's one other problem from an IoT perspective you have to solve, which is this thorny issue of roaming versus localization. And that's probably a good place to finish. Over and above the fragmentation of the industry, which is 800 and whatever players all saying, my SIM, my SIM, my SIM, you also have the regulators who are helping those players by the imposition of permanent roaming restrictions. So if you're now this project manager again of a megacorp, and I say to you, okay, Tom, I've explained to you about eSIMs, I've explained to you about MNOs, I've explained to you about platforms. Oh, is that everything, Nick? Oh no, it's just one more thing. One more thing. Make sure your devices aren't connected for more than 3 months. And you go, what? So, no, well, 3 months is permanent roaming. You're going to get kicked off. Why am I going to get kicked off? Well, it's a bit complicated. I can't explain right now. But after 3 months, you've got to swap the SIM in the device for the local. So if you're in the US, you can't roam from a European provider. After 3 months, you've got to take the SIM out and put a Verizon SIM in because there's permanent roaming. And you say, well, I can't take the SIM out of the device. It's in my device. It's locked in. It's on the board. And so that's yet another barrier. So what we've done is that we have it's like the Star Alliance. It's a series of MNOs around the world that we interconnect to, but we can localize our eSIM onto these partners. So we can localize a SIM onto Verizon OTA. So it's the only SIM that can be made to look like a Verizon SIM without it being a Verizon SIM. So when it lands, you have a pulse oximeter in the UK, it works. Take it with you in your suitcase to the US. It doesn't just roam onto Verizon, it localizes onto Verizon. You'll never get kicked off. So if you move to the US, it's the same product. So the point I'm trying to make is eSIM on its own is the switch. But what you then need is the ability to have federated EUICC enabled orchestration with the maximum choice of localization with roaming infill, which is what I meant by the Star Alliance model. Buy one airline ticket, fly on any airline. Don't think about it, right? They're competitors, but that's not your problem. You bought a ticket, right? And so one thing that by having that model, what we're able to do is offer global connectivity, which is why this small company in Guildford runs the IoT for 4 of the Fortune 10. So we do all of Amazon's IoT, right? Well, we're a tiny company, but we do Amazon. The reason is Amazon want to be able to put a locker on any street corner in the world, and it just connects and it stays connected. So we do Shell's EV chargers, et cetera, et cetera. So what I think is when you think about that and you get it, the light goes on, you say, okay, ubiquitous connectivity from the point I switch it on with a global offering. Then you start saying, where are the industries that are going to go? Healthcare is a really obvious one. Healthcare is huge pressure to actually free up the beds, solve the problem with the GPs, etc. EV charging, really obvious one because the move to electric cars. Asset tracking, really obvious one, because when things move, they go between M&Os. And so you can find these industries which in 2022 will become big adopters of ubiquitous global connectivity. So putting a bow around it, for all these reasons, I think things never happen as quickly as you think. Never make a prediction and have a number and a time scale in the same sentence. But having said that, I really believe that 2022 will see the big guys, companies, adopt global solutions where they are in control, and the players underneath are playing a different role to what they're playing today. And the net benefit of all of that would be the complexity won't go away. It'll get less. The choices will increase, and the inflection point of adoption will start to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the main issues, isn't it? As we touched on at the start, I like to call it greed and good, right? So, if you think about IoT and what IoT can do, generally it's helping people, the environment, and I think that the definition of IoT in its simplest terms is connecting objects and environment to the internet, right? So if we can't have a common platform or people working together in a good way, then we can't connect the amount of devices to really justify where this could go. But equally, we've got private business that are after the money, as you say, and there's no shame being after the money.
Business, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that sometimes we're at odds with this. There's one playing against the other, and so on and so forth. But it's nice to hear that the work that you're doing in the businesses.
Well, yeah, and amongst others, I would push back a little bit on that, Tom, because I think the view that it's easy to argue the point this is good because it's good for the end user, and then you can say, well, it's bad for the people who are making a very good business by the fact that they can't do this. But if you go back 40 years, which let's say some of us can, every technology that I've seen since I left university started off as proprietary with no interoperability, got to a certain level, stalled, and then end user demand insisted on interoperability and some form of standard. So when I first got my job in Manchester selling mini computers for HP, we sold the HP 3000, and our biggest benefit was that it had its own software, none of which would run on the DEC VAX or the AS400. And then suddenly open systems, Unix, everything was interoperable. And then we had PCs, and there was Microsoft PCs and Apple PCs. Okay, it's mostly interoperable now. It's not completely interoperable. But anyway, when I first got my mobile phone, I remember it was huge. I had a big strap. It was about £15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I used to carry this thing around. But if I met you then, I'd say, you said, I've got one of those. Look, mine's heavy as well. But I said to you, what network are you on? I'm on Vodafone. If you said, I'm not on Vodafone, I'm on whoever. Oh, sorry, I can't call you because you're not on my network. Well, it's nonsense now. You have interoperability. Open source with software. The cloud made everything transparent. You don't ask what servers Amazon run.
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on. Every technology starts off as proprietary, and ultimately end user demand forces interoperability around a common standard. And as a result of which, the lesson from history is adoption increases. Cisco's business increased when it could send packets to a Juniper router or an Avaya switch. So interoperability isn't a threat. Actually, it makes the overall pie bigger for everybody. And the reason is that end users spend more, so the pot gets bigger. And when we talk about 11 billion versus 50 billion, it's not about who's got the 11 billion or the 3 billion of the 11 billion. It's about the 39 billion that people wanted to put on the net, put onto IoT, that they're not doing so yet. The moment you make it possible for them to do it, there's a lot of money for everybody. So it's not a threat if you can make the transition and not get disrupted. If you can become either volume or value, then you'll be able to do it. If you can't, you might fall down the middle, and there's always casualties in any market disruption. So just as there will be in this time. But I do believe that although on the surface people say this is a threat, I think in retrospect, we should be able to take a step back and say, you know what? Anything that's good for customers is good for all of us. This is going to make the market bigger. And yes, there will be casualties, but that's always the case in business. If you can adopt and if you can adapt, then it actually makes the opportunities bigger, not smaller. The most important thing is you've got to build from what the customer wants inwards, not from what you make outwards.
Yeah, very well summed up, Nick. Yeah, I think it's interesting just to go back to your point that you made about the connected devices, and I wonder whether or not Gartner and other research institutes were taking into account those figures when looking at proprietary to interoperability.
I suspect not. I was talking to them then, and I think we genuinely believe. I mean, Cisco said it, IBM said it, Ericsson said it. I think we genuinely believe because we couldn't actually see what the problem was. I mean, I remember just before I left Cisco, John Chambers, our CEO, was saying, "Well, I got it wrong. It wasn't 50 billion; it's 500 million." I mean, he wasn't saying it was 10, because the cost of the Moore's law is coming down. You can now put small sensors on boxes and packaging, and so if you look at it from a technology point of view, it's 500 million. Some people are saying, "Oh well, sensors get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you can print an IoT sensor, you can print a battery, it can generate its own power. You can actually put IoT devices into the blood, nanobots." So you then say, "Well, it's trillions." And from a technology point of view, the numbers are huge. When you actually look at it from but what's it going to take? If the answer is, well, you just put a different SIM in every device, it's like, it costs. One of our analysts that we talked to, Kaleido, said for a large enterprise, every additional SIM that they have to put into their products costs them $500,000 a year of integration costs at the back end. So if you're a vendor, I've got 40% of that enterprise's SIMs, but they've got 10 SIMs, 10 platforms. They're spending $5 million a year gluing this stuff together. But you don't see that. You're selling your 40% or your 10%. So from a technology point of view, it could go to trillions. But what's it going to take to make it frictionless and easy from an enterprise point of view? And that means interoperability and out-of-the-box ubiquitous connectivity, single pane of glass, single support, single price, single contract, single set of APIs. These lessons have all been learned in the IT industry for the last 40 years. It's not new. It just hasn't happened yet in cellular connectivity. We're not the first to do this. You can make a convincing case we're the last to do this. Name me one other industry where there's 820 players, each leading with a proprietary product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, I mean, it's fantastic, some of the work that you're doing and the awareness that you're raising around IoT. I mean, going back to the fact that you run a podcast, I run a podcast, we decided to do this together to raise the overall profile, right? And that's interoperability in the sense of media, right? And the fact that and the fact that we want to do that. And it's been hugely interesting talking to you today, and we wanted you on the show for ages. So I really appreciate you coming on, and thank you ever so much.
Yeah, I've appreciated it. Sorry for the ping. Now I'm pinging, which
it's okay. Do you know what? I'm pinging all over the shop, but I don't know what it is. I don't know what piece of software I'm running, whether or not I should turn it off or not. But there we are. Nick, where can people find out more about yourself and your podcast, social media, etc.?
I mean, obviously me, LinkedIn. So it's Nick Earle, Earle. Maybe it's popping up on the screen. Don't know.
We'll make it pop up.
Make it pop up. Yeah, everybody leaves the E off. The podcast is called IoT Leaders, so they know how to search for podcasts. And we have just like this. We have guests. We have some great guests on that get into different verticals. I'll finish off. We've got a good one coming up soon. I haven't recorded it yet, but the next one I'm doing is with our two founders created Zigbee. So they're the Zigbee guys.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and they're still in the business just outside the door here. So, I mean, brains the size of planets. Well, talking of that, but Zigbee is being used by the Mars rover to communicate with the helicopter. So literally out of this world idea, because
Yeah.
Zigbee is being deployed on Mars. But um, they somebody said to me, "Why don't you?" Because we've had Tony Shakib, head of IoT for Microsoft, on. We've had the head of IoT for AWS. We've had end users, analysts, and somebody said, "Why don't you get your founders on?" Because they created Zigbee, and then they created Eseye. Everything I've talked about was nothing to do with me. It was the brilliant vision of Ian Marsden and Paul Marshall, our founders, and I'm just the hired gun at the front end. And so they said, "Why don't you get the founders on?" So my next one, which will be interesting to try and control the meeting, will be me interviewing the founders about what was the spark, the genesis of them creating Eseye. Because in retrospect, you can all claim, "Oh, I thought this was true right from the very beginning." But actually, when you dig under the surface, most strategies people sort of fell into, and they sort of happened, and you went a certain way. And so we've done a bit of a rehearsal, but I'm looking forward to that one. But it's not recorded yet. So IoT leaders, and that's the way you do it. But I have listened to yours, Tom. So rather than just plug mine, I would say they should tell their friends about yours.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's a great one. I like it.
Oh, well, look, I appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, yeah, my background was in embedded computing, and I've been involved with hacking electronics together for quite a while. So, yeah, that's me. But really appreciate you coming on, Nick. Once again, thank you.
All right. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it. I hope the listeners did as well.
Guys, as always, get involved in the discussion. Do you agree with what Nick's saying with regards to IoT in 2022? As always, like, comment, and subscribe. Next time, we'll be joined by Bjorn Hansen, head of IoT from Telia. Stay tuned for that.